Welcome to New Realities. My name is Alan Steinfeld. Today I have one of my favorite guests back on the show. He is a linguist, a scholar, a metaphysician. He's the author of The Keys of Enoch, Book of Knowledge, and as well as the Pista Sophia with his wife Desiree. He has traveled the world exploring consciousness in its manifestation as new phenomena. As we emerge as a spiritual culture, people like Dr. Hurtak, Dr. James Hurtak, are documenting these new experiences, and he is part of a new phenomena of scientists, cosmologists, and spiritual seekers. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Particularly the focus of today's program will be on the understanding of what is this thing Melchisedek, the understanding of Melchisedek. Thank you, Dr. Hurtak, for being here with me. If we're going to talk about Melchisedek, I think we have to go back to the Bible. There's a section of the Bible where I think Abraham wrestled with the angel of Melchizedek over the ownership of Jerusalem.
Actually, the context is in the first book of the Bible, the Bereshith Bara, as it is called in the original Torah text. In Genesis chapter 14, there's a struggle that takes place in the Middle East between what is called the warriors or the Axis lords. And at the end of the struggle, Abraham is visited by one who is celebrated as he who is called Melchizedek.
Now, Melchisedek, Malik is the word for king.
Right.
Sadik was the word for mystic.
Correct.
So I would say...
Or righteous person.
Yeah, but there was the person that... Righteous person was a kind of old English understanding of what a real mystic is, in my experience. So the Melchizedek was the king of those seers, those ancient sages of knowledge. That was what Melchizedek is. And supposedly, I think according to your work and others, it is a cosmic priesthood. It's not localized on planet Earth. That Melchizedek are those... beings that travel from planetary and civilizations to instill them with higher knowledge. Would you say that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I had studied the ancient linguistic texts.
Yes.
And I was familiar with the Ebla text.
What's that?
The Ebla text were the cuneiform documents found in Syria in the 1970s, over 25,000 cuneiform Akkadian documents, and that is to say an ancient language that refers to beings that visited from the higher worlds. According to scholars, the Ebla texts are at least 1,000 years prior to the received biblical text that we know as our Bible.
Was that influenced? Was think the Bible was influenced by the Akkadian text?
Well, it's interesting that the great scholar David Noel Friedman at the University of Chicago sat down and began to work with these texts, and he realized that what he was seeing in the earlier text, written 1,000 years before, was the same use of names of kings in the same mathematical pattern. And he came to a sudden realization that there was a proto-Bible or earlier tradition that the Bible that we call our Bible had to draw from to have the consistency of the names of the potentates.
What's a potentate?
The great rulers or the absolutist figures of control, plus the arrangement of the spelling of the names.
The spelling of the names created mathematics. That was a certain coding of...
Right. This was the struggle taking place amongst warrior kings in the ancient Near East, and at the site of a massive struggle, divine intervention takes place on behalf of Abraham, and he offers up the first type of Eucharist or celebration with the element of water and bread to Melchizedek. Now, Jewish scholars consider him, Melchizedek, or Melchizedek, to be the authentic symbol of the priest-king figure. In the New Testament, the Christian documents of the New Testament, in the book of Hebrews, he is said to be without genealogy or father or mother. Namely, he is from the archangelic kingdom that he appears. So there is in the greater scholarship of all of the documents of traditional religion, as well as the lost documents of the mystical tradition, such as the Ebla text, the Nag Hammadi Coptic text, many others, also a reference to Melchizedek as something that is greater in scope. As you said, it's an order of many figures as opposed to one.
Right, but I mean, and also in your book, The Keys of Enoch, you also make reference to that. But before we get into actually what you document about this, I want to ask about this understanding of mythology. So you talk about the Syrian text, the Akkadian text. Now, could that be a mythos of a history as opposed to real gods or higher beings visited? You know, we create stories about our history, the humanity does, and there are myths of the gods of Greece, let's say, that perhaps didn't live but were archetypal aspects of our own consciousness. So how do you make the distinction between true beings coming and visiting and this a tendency for humanity to create myths out of our history?
This is the profound question you're asking.
Yes.
Are we looking at history that is mythologized
Mm-hmm.
or mythology that is historicized?
Right, exactly.
And what I found in my work in terms of archaeological work in the Middle East, linguistic work with actual scholars using actual radar, using actual geophysics to locate archives under the ground or in mountainous regions, is that there's a higher meaning to myth. There is the traditional concept that myth is simply a abstract symbol, an esoteric symbol.
A retelling of our story.
But in the alignment of actual cities or places,
Uh-huh.
we have what is called the mythos, the higher meaning of life, connected with the bythos, the ancient Greek word meaning the foundation, the limitless foundation that is established in the reality of the life experience. And so it is
So how would you explain
the
that in simple?
physical place setting, the physical environment, the physical connection where the higher world and the lower world meet together.
That's myth. That's a new that's a new understanding of mythos.
Yes, and where it connects together in the finding of the actual documents or the actual artifacts or the actual tomb or whatever is the concept of the bythos, the real foundation, which is no longer abstract but is real.
Bythos means what?
In the Greek words meaning the limitless depth or foundation. In other words, the story behind the story or the myth behind the myth.
So let's say there, you know, maybe in 500 years there'll be a myth about Abraham Lincoln, and maybe they make him into a god. I mean, they'll forget the fact that he actually was a real person, and so he'll be mythicized. But then you're saying beyond that,
if they could take a lock of his hair,
yes,
and genetically clone that to create, as it were, an offshoot or a representation of Abraham Lincoln, then you have the scientific reality entering into the spiritual or the philosophical overview.
But it is the tendencies of our human mind to take both history and myth, to merge it together to create an archetype for what we currently need to experience as human psychology and consciousness.
That's a natural disposition.
Right. So Enoch was probably a real being that did live, and you've had experiences with this being called Enoch, but actually there's also the myth of Enoch, as well as a city of Enoch that was living, that was part of a dwelling place in the Middle East. So
Correct.
all that gets merged together, and you are bringing through, with your experience of Enoch, your personal experience, a reclarification of the old mythos to create not even a myth, but a new story of possibilities. So we're moving out of the old mythic time into a new mythic reality. Does that make sense?
Exactly. To carry on, just as we have the mythical Melchisedek,
yes,
so also we have the real Melchisedek or Melchisedek figure, who I, in the context of writing this book, actually experienced in a higher state of consciousness.
So for people who don't know, Dr. Hurtak had an experience where he was taken with his body to higher levels of existence, and he met these figures, Enoch, Melchizedek, Metatron. And tell us about your experience.
Well, some would argue that this is simply a free association of my consciousness. In other words, it's an abstract reality that has no tangible or physical reality. So,
well, like dreams, though.
Right.
You know, we say dreams are that. Our dreams don't have a tangible reality.
And some would argue that dreams are the true ontology of life, the true foundation out of which everything comes and is reorganized as the mind-body goes into this dream state.
Right, but you had an experience with your body, physical body.
And spiritual body.
And spiritual, well, I don't know what that means, really, spiritual body.
It means that there were several levels of experience through which I was shown a scenario abstract, a map of the world, which is included in the book, and perhaps we can get the camera
Yeah, you can press
in the
2
studio
and
to
do
look
that.
very carefully at the map of the world, and as we home in on the map, you'll see over North America the dove. You'll see 12 meridians with pyramidal-like extensions. My finger on one side of the plate marks one that comes over the area of Indonesia,
Right,
the island of Flores,
right.
where recently evidences of a small intelligence has been found, a type of proto-humanity called the Homo floresiensis.
But what does that have to do with Melchizedek
Well, it
and the
means
vision?
that in giving of this map by this higher angelic
Oh,
figure,
Melchizedek gave you, Melchizedek himself. Well, before we get to that, you met him face to face. You met this being
in a body of energy.
in a body, but you knew he was Melchizedek, or that was...
From what the mental image came through, he identified himself as he who worked with Enoch as Melchizedek.
And he gave you this map.
This map was given, imprinted into my consciousness as a way of validating the 12 regions of the world where the ancient order of Melchizedek or Melchizedek worked upon the planet, and leaving behind, as it were, evidences of the updating of the human race, where evidences would be found, archival, linguistic, anthropological, and also astronomical. And of this map given in 1973, 8 of the 12 regions or spoke areas that I'm referring to in this plate, the longitudinal lines, have been validated by remarkable findings.
So what does it mean? Can I just look at me? I just wanted to start.
What does this mean? It
What-
means
well, first, what does it mean that these are ancient sites of Melchizedek? And then we'll get into what he actually meant by showing it. What does it mean there were ancient, like, teaching spots?
it
where
means that the whole concept of Melchizedek isn't limited to the Middle East.
Right.
What we have in our Bible record is one aspect, one episode of a much larger story, whereby this teaching order of Melchizedek influenced people in other parts of the world in other time periods.
So it would be like Quetzalcoatl to some of the Native Americans here in this kind. Would that be equivalent to Melchizedek? And what did the teachings of these Melchizedek beings do in all these areas?
They were the ones who brought the higher science, the higher knowledge of the cosmos.
Were a true purpose for
Right.
being
They were
here.
the poets, scholars, the pre-scientists, the mystics, those who orchestrated the education of the soul. And they left behind the great teaching libraries because they knew that the human race being tested in this material realm of creation would go through entropy or go through a loss of consciousness. Therefore, in each part of the world cultures, they seeded information that ultimately would be resynthesized, found, identified, and used as a preparation for a much greater part of ascendancy.
So you would say there were beings like Shiva that would appear in India, or Osiris in Egypt, or what's the thing in China? The ancient ones in China. And I mean, every culture has its historic wise sages that would appear and give them the secrets.
Avatars, both
Avatars.
male and female.
So our tendency to mythicize or make them abstract beings of our own conscious is really a false interpretation.
To historicize them only to one people, one culture, one place.
But also to say that they weren't real, to say that and you're saying that these beings were truly beings that came down. They are the gods of old that gave us this history. So this is an updating of psychology, Levi-Strauss, Joseph Campbell.
Well, Levi-Strauss and others, I would say not gods, but sons of God. They would call themselves B'nai Elohim in the Hebrew sense. They're the ones who are spoken of in the pluralistic majesty of the Elohim, manifesting divine teaching, grace, and wisdom.
So truly, though, these divine beings, and they're equal to us, they're not greater than us. They are here to spark our own divinity as well.
They are known by their humility of not saying they're God, but simply that they are emissaries of light. They are way-showers of glory. They represent a higher divine family, and they're not limited by the constructs or the paradigms of history.
But where does this get into the 12th planet, the work of, what's his name, Zecharia Sitchin, who said those beings came here to actually enslave us? Now, I don't believe that, but that's now a new myth that has occurred. What's your opinion of that?
I go along with Richard Hall's criticism of Zechariah as trying to over-historicize some aspects particularly of Akkadian Sumerian myth history,
Yes.
I see this is far more universal, and as we have found through our findings in China and more recent studies in the oceanic frontiers of Japan and Taiwan, we have found that there is certainly much earlier strata of artifacts that go even before the last glacial period.
So what are you saying Sitchin is doing? What is he saying?
Well, Sitchin is more of a popular writer addressing some of the myths from the standpoint of what he interprets, particularly the Elohim, as what I would call the lesser God force to enslave rather than to liberate. It's very clear from the Nag Hammadi text, even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, Melchizedek is mentioned with the angels of glory as liberating humanity.
But those are much later than what you've just cited as the Akkadian text, 1,000 years even before the biblical record.
But in the Akkadian text, it's a positive affirmation rather than a negative, constructive.
So Zachariah Sitchin gets his ideas of a negative enslavement from his own kind of overlay.
I think it's a misreading and too much of drawing from what I would call the Nephilim, or the hero concepts that fell into the material substrata, and thus began to enslave themselves into lower thought forms of philosophy of earth-centeredness.
The Nephilim being what?
The Nephilim being the false programmers of the fallen angels, if you go back to the original terminology.
So there are, that's also another level I wanted to talk to you about here. There is these invisible forces, let's say, have manipulated humanity, as well as the Melchizedek that has seeded humanity with its own divine knowing. So there's a struggle here on planet Earth.
Definitely a struggle, and this is why the Academy for Future Science is looking at this historic literature along with the new areas of science to give people a greater opportunity to work with the greater forces of intelligence in the universe rather than the limited extraterrestrial or the linear singularities of male-orientated religion that tend to overlook the wisdom traditions of the Divine Mother as well as the Divine Father.
So there's the Melchizedek tradition of the Divine Father, the Divine Mess, and then now we are embracing more in what you've written here in the Pista Sophia, a divine feminine aspect to balance the Melchizedekian order, would you say? There's a feminine part, a part of Melchizedek.
To balance not the Enochian or the higher order, but rather the lower Adamic nature that has been caught up in the flotsam and jetsam of life. In other words, Melchizedek, we are told in the Pista Sophia, works with Enoch, works with Christ, works with these greater teachers. And if I can quote this, and this is very important for our television audience, from the Pista Sophia, we are told in book 3, there's 5 books in this collection, Melchizedek, who was in the region of those of the right, capital R, which means of the right hand of God, namely the sons of God, seals that soul, that is to say, the soul that goes on to the next life, and the receivers of Melchizedek seal that soul and lead it to the treasury, capital T, of the light, capital L, which means they are the ones who not only educate the soul, but when the soul leaves the body and goes into the next phase of evolutionary creation, they are the ones who continue with this process in the universe of the universe.
But they also don't have to leave their body. A Melchizedek can also initiate beings in this lifetime, from my understanding. The interaction of the Melchizedekian order in this life is to initiate us here to deepen our own access to our spiritual nature. That's what I think coming into a Melchizedekian order or aligning with Melchizedek energy will bring us. It's an initiation.
Very
is
well
what
said.
I'm saying.
Extremely well said, because the whole idea of bringing the soul through self-realization, through higher faith wisdom into creativity, is to recognize we don't have to draw from the thought forms of the flotsam and jetsam that bring us down to the world of negativity, of geopolitical conflict, that enhance the lower strata of creation or history or dualism, but rather we concentrate now on the higher thought forms of music.
Well, that's okay, yes.
Of higher science, of higher psychology, of positive associations through which the inner powers of the mind that are latent are suddenly liberated, allowing the spark of divinity within each individual to rise to a higher level
Well, yeah, you're talking about initiation. This is where I wanted this discussion of
Exactly.
Melchizedek to move into.
Ultimately, we
Yes.
move from a myth of Melchizedek as simply a mythical archetype or
Right.
historic figure
Right.
into something that there is a personal participation, an experience that takes place.
Well,
Christians speak of the rebirth
mhm.
with the Jesus figure, but there's also in the Coptic Christian tradition and the mystic Judaic tradition a rebirth with Melchizedek. This is
Right.
why we're told in the Christian book of Hebrews, New Testament chapters 5 and 6, that Jesus is of the order of Melchizedek.
Oh,
They share a higher order. We
it
find
says
this
that.
even in the Nag Hammadi text, a scroll of Melchizedek. They both share this process of ascension.
Well,
we find it in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Melchizedek is a great communicator of the higher light. Is this pure mythology, anthropology, or is it actual science and psychology of a wisdom point to which we actually reach up and experience this inner mental expansion so powerful that we can actually work with those of the higher world?
Well, this is what phases of initiation are supposed to do. I think actually the whole Christian tradition is really not so much a worshipful tradition. It is a series of initiations going from baptism to, communion. Is all about deepening our own spiritual connection. Not that I'm even Christian, but what I've studied about this, each level of that Christian life, let's say, was to deepen the connection to our own God and to the own Christ within.
Now you're speaking from the Coptic traditions and church, lost teachings of Nag Hammadi. Now you're speaking from the Ethiopic church, the Ethiopian church. You're not speaking from the intellectual religion of Western Christianity that sees all of this as myth and metaphor, but not higher reality.
Right.
So you're going back to a much earlier source, and you're drawing from your enthusiasm of having had some experience with the music of Enoch, with the teaching of Melchizedek, to the realization that this is not one figure, but a whole group of figures working collectively as a family.
And to open us up, and you do a lot of initiations through music, and I think, though, all those old initiations are now being washed away. They are no longer valid because the Earth, as a planetary being, and we as planetary citizens, have arisen through the levels of the murk. And we are all now at a phase for new initiations. This is why your book is so important, because it's a new peak of reality that it's bringing us to. So you and others like you, and even this program, are bringing people to a new ideas of initiation and igniting new sparks in us. So we only have a few minutes, but I'd like for you to talk about these new areas of initiation with your music and with some of the new knowledge you're bringing through, so we can raise collectively as a family of humanity.
I think if we can simply look at the time factor we have for a short discussion, if people go to our webpage, keysofenoch.org, and scroll up or scroll down to the music selections, they will see that we have worked with Alice Coltrane, many gifted musicians like the German composer Peter Vogler, others, even Carlos Santana, to create a new type of music of what I call super soul that can hear, as it were, the higher synergy.
But just give us one. I mean, you talk about scrolling. It's an ancient tradition of scrolling. It's funny. But can you just give us one little brief understanding of initiation right here, so people can tune, just who are watching, to a higher frequency?
It's the ability to turn basically the soul inside out by recognizing that there is not only a tree of life, as we see here on our stand, where we are sitting, symbolizing the ancient tree of knowledge with all of its branches, but within our body there's an actual tree of life that reaches to the other dimensions. And if we can visualize daily a sacred space through which we visualize the kether, the crown chakra opening, with the bina, the understanding, and the hokmah, these are ancient but very important terms for the higher wisdom, then we can put on a new mind. We can put on the helmet of salvation that the Apostle Paul speaks of in the New Testament. We can put on this higher garment of ascension that many of the great teachers of all the great mystical teachings speak of. And if we can use this with the ability to think in technicolor and think with the music of the spheres and actually experience the inner dwelling of this music, then we can unleash these tremendous powers that are latent within us. It's not a use of words. It's not a use of pieces of knowledge, it's an actual flowing of the higher and the human self in marriage. This is the greater experience, and if you have also the opportunity to go to the pistasophia.org website,
Yes.
you will see this book in all of its unique glory because of the greater nuances that have come out.
And we also have a great interview with Dr. Hurtak and I about the Pistasophia, just about the Pistasophia on YouTube and Google. Just write in Pistasophia and you'll be able to get that. Thank you so much for sharing this deeper wisdom that you're bringing through. And I think we're now emerging into a new time where new knowledge is coming forth. And we're sort of erasing the old traditions.
And for those of you who are watching this program, keep your eyes looking to the stars. Keep in touch with us through the Academy for Future Science. We also participate with the Parliament of World Religions. Realize we're in a tremendous drama of seeing the ecumenical spirit come out through the work of the Divine Mother, through the lost scriptures, the lost text. But each of you have this opportunity to reach within your soul and realize the tree of life. This is the mana ein sof, the food, the daily bread that makes everything come alive.
Thank you, Dr. Hurtak. I've been talking to JJ Hurtak, Dr. JJ Hurtak, one of the founders, along with his wife Desiree, of the Academy for Future Science. He's also the author of the Keys of Enoch, Book of Knowledge. And we have done a whole series of programs. If you're interested in that series, you can look on my website, newrealities.tv. I look forward to comments and email me at newrealities@earthlink.net. I'm Alan Steinfeld, and thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you. Good conversation. Thank you.
Always wonderful to be with you.
I think when we discover together something new and we allow creativity to flow, then something arises out of us.
And goes into the next phase of evolutionary creation. They are the ones who continue with this process in the universe of the universe.
Now, the interaction of the Melchizedekian order in this life is to initiate us here to deepen our own access to our spiritual nature.